Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion, written by Robert Cialdini. First published in 1984, this book has become one of the most important works in social psychology and has sold millions of copies worldwide. It's a book about how we make decisions, how others influence us, and how we can protect ourselves from unwanted manipulation while understanding the principles that guide human behavior. Robert Cialdini is a psychologist who spent years studying the tactics used by compliance professionals, salespeople, fundraisers, recruiters, advertisers, and others whose job is to get people to say yes. But he didn't just study influence from an academic perspective. He went undercover. He took jobs in sales organizations, car dealerships, fundraising companies, and advertising agencies. He trained as a salesperson, worked the floor, observed the techniques that actually worked in the real world. What Cialdini discovered was fascinating. The influence professionals, the really successful ones, weren't necessarily smarter or more knowledgeable than others, but they understood, often intuitively, certain psychological principles that made people more likely to comply with requests. These principles work consistently across different contexts, different cultures, different types of requests. They were like weapons of influence that could be deployed to change behavior. The book identifies 6 fundamental principles of persuasion, 6 psychological shortcuts that our brains use to make decisions quickly. These shortcuts usually serve us well. They help us navigate a complex world without having to carefully analyze every decision. But they can also be exploited, triggered by those who understand how they work, causing us to comply with requests we might otherwise refuse. Why do we use these shortcuts? Cialdini explains that modern life is simply too complex for us to carefully consider every decision we make. We're bombarded with information, requests, choices. If we tried to fully analyze every option, we'd be paralyzed, unable to function. So our brains evolved shortcuts, quick decision-making rules that usually work well enough. Think about how a turkey mother responds to her chicks. She doesn't carefully examine each baby turkey to decide if it's really hers. Instead, she responds to a simple cue, the cheep cheep sound. If it makes that sound, she treats it as her chick. If it doesn't, she ignores or attacks it. Researchers have even tricked turkey mothers into caring for stuffed polecats, natural predators, by putting a device inside that plays the cheep cheep sound. This seems foolish, right? The turkey is responding mechanically to a single feature, ignoring all other information. But actually, this shortcut works well most of the time. Real chicks make that sound, predators don't. The shortcut is efficient and usually accurate. Only in unusual circumstances, like when researchers deliberately manipulate the cues, does it lead the turkey astray. Humans use similar shortcuts. We have automatic response patterns that are triggered by specific cues. These patterns usually serve us well. They help us make good decisions quickly, but they can also be triggered inappropriately, causing us to respond in ways that aren't in our best interest. Cialdini's goal in writing this book wasn't just academic. He wanted to help people understand how influence works so they could make better decisions. He wanted to expose the tactics that manipulators use, while also showing that these same principles, used ethically, are legitimate parts of human social interaction. The 6 principles Cialdini identifies are reciprocation, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. We'll explore each of these in depth, but before we dive into the specifics, let's understand why this topic matters. Every day you're the target of influence attempts. Advertisers want you to buy their products. Politicians want your vote. Charities want your donations. Salespeople want your business. Friends want your time and attention. Some of these influence attempts are legitimate and ethical. Others are manipulative and exploitative. Understanding the principles of influence helps you distinguish between the two. But there's another reason to study influence: self-awareness. We like to think we're rational decision makers, carefully weighing evidence and making logical choices. But research shows that our decisions are often driven by automatic, unconscious responses to social cues. We comply with requests for reasons we don't fully understand or acknowledge. By understanding these principles, we can become more aware of our own decision-making process. Cialdini emphasizes an important point. These principles aren't inherently good or bad. They're tools. They can be used ethically to facilitate genuine agreement and beneficial exchanges, or they can be used unethically to manipulate people into decisions that serve the influencer's interests rather than their own. The difference lies in the intent and the context. The book is filled with real-world examples, research studies, and Cialdini's own undercover experiences. He shows how car salesmen use the commitment principle to close deals, how cults use social proof to recruit members, how fundraisers use reciprocation to increase donations, how advertisers use authority figures to sell products. Each principle is illustrated with vivid, memorable examples that show how it operates in practice. One thing that makes this book powerful is its practicality. Cialdini doesn't just describe psychological phenomena abstractly, he shows you exactly how these principles are deployed in everyday influence situations. He gives you the tools to recognize when someone is using these techniques on you, and he suggests ways to defend yourself against manipulation while still remaining open to legitimate persuasion. It's worth noting that Cialdini's research has stood the test of time. The book was first published in 1984, but the principles remain relevant today. In fact, they may be more relevant than ever. In our digital age, with sophisticated marketing techniques and social media influence, understanding these principles is crucial. The tactics have evolved. Social proof now comes from online reviews and social media likes, but the underlying principles remain the same. The book also raises important ethical questions. If you understand these principles, should you use them? When is it acceptable to use influence techniques, and when does it cross the line into manipulation? Cialdini argues that ethical influence is about facilitating decisions that are genuinely in people's interests, while unethical manipulation is about tricking people into decisions that primarily benefit the influencer. As we journey through this book, we'll examine each principle of influence in detail. We'll see how it works, why it works, when it's used ethically, and when it's used to manipulate. We'll learn to recognize the signs that someone is using these techniques on us, and we'll understand our own susceptibility to these influence tactics. The goal isn't to become cynical or suspicious of everyone. The goal is to become a more conscious, deliberate decision maker, to recognize ourselves when we're responding automatically to influence triggers, and to choose whether that automatic response serves our interests. To say yes when we genuinely want to say yes, and no when that's the right answer, regardless of what influence techniques are being deployed. This is important knowledge. In a world where everyone is trying to influence everyone else, where persuasion is a multi-billion-dollar industry, where our attention and choices are constantly being competed for, understanding influence isn't optional, it's essential. Let's begin our exploration of the psychology of persuasion. The principle of reciprocation. The first weapon of influence Cialdini examines is reciprocation. This principle is simple but incredibly powerful. We feel obligated to repay what others have given us. If someone does us a favor, we feel we owe them one in return. If someone gives us a gift, we feel pressure to reciprocate. This sense of obligation is one of the most fundamental aspects of human social behavior. The reciprocation rule has deep evolutionary roots. Human societies couldn't function without it. It allows people to give things to others with confidence that they are not simply losing those resources. The gift will be returned, if not by the same person, then by the community as a whole. This makes cooperation possible, enables division of labor, and creates social bonds. Every human culture has some version of the reciprocation rule. It's taught to children from an early age. We're told to say thank you when we receive something, implicitly acknowledging the debt. We're taught not to be ingrates or freeloaders, people who take without giving back. The social pressure to reciprocate is intense. Cialdini illustrates this with a simple example. A researcher conducted an experiment where a Confederate would leave to get a drink during a break in a study. Sometimes the Confederate brought back a Coca-Cola for the participant, uninvited and unexpected. Later, the Confederate asked the participant if they'd buy raffle tickets he was selling. Participants who had received the free Coke bought twice as many raffle tickets as those who hadn't. Think about what happened here. The Coca-Cola cost maybe 25 cents, but it's triggered a sense of obligation that led people to spend significantly more on raffle tickets they probably didn't want. The reciprocation rule created a debt that participants felt compelled to repay, even though they never asked for the Coke in the first place. This is a key feature of the reciprocation rule. It can be triggered by uninvited gifts or favors. You don't have to ask for something to feel obligated to reciprocate. Someone does something for you, gives you something, and suddenly you owe them. This gives enormous power to the person who initiates the exchange. They can create obligations in others simply by giving. The Hare Krishna Society exploited this brilliantly. In the 1970s, Krishna devotees would approach people in airports and give them a flower as a gift. Most people tried to refuse, but the Krishna would insist it's a gift for you. Once the person accepted, the Krishna would ask for a donation. Many people, feeling obligated by the gift, would donate. The Krishna didn't need or want the flowers back, they'd just fish them out of the trash after the donors left and use them again. Charities understand reciprocation too. That's why they send you address labels or greeting cards along with their donation requests. These gifts are designed to trigger your sense of obligation. You didn't ask for the labels, you might not even want them, but now that you have them, you feel a subtle pressure to reciprocate with a donation. Reciprocation is also used in business. Free samples aren't just about letting you try a product, they're about creating a sense of obligation. Companies give you free trials, free consultations, free estimates, knowing that once you've received something, you'll feel more obligated to buy. The favour creates a psychological debt. One particularly powerful application of reciprocation is what Cialdini calls reciprocal concessions. This works through a technique called rejection then retreat, or door in the face. Here's how it operates. Someone makes a large request that you're likely to refuse. When you refuse, they make a smaller request. This smaller request seems like a concession on their part. They've backed down from their initial demand. The reciprocation rule now kicks in. They made a concession, so you feel obligated to make a concession too. You agree to the smaller request. Cialdini experienced this firsthand. A Boy Scout asked him to buy tickets to a circus. Expensive tickets, multiple tickets. Cialdini refused. The boy then asked if he'd buy chocolate bars instead, just $1 or $2. Cialdini bought them even though he didn't like chocolate. Why? Because the boy's retreat from the larger request to the smaller one felt like a concession. Cialdini felt obligated to reciprocate that concession with one of his own, agreeing to buy the chocolate. This technique is used constantly in negotiations. Start with an extreme demand, then compromise down to what you actually wanted all along. The other party feels like you've made concessions, so they're more willing to agree, even though your final position was your real goal from the beginning. The power of reciprocation extends beyond material exchanges. It works with information, with concessions in negotiations, with political favors, with social courtesies. Someone discloses personal information to you, you feel obligated to disclose in return. Someone compromises on an issue, you feel pressure to compromise too. Someone invites you to their party, you feel you should invite them to yours. The reciprocation rule can even override our dislike of someone. In the raffle ticket study mentioned earlier, whether participants liked the Confederate who gave them the Coke didn't matter much. They still bought more tickets. The obligation created by reciprocation was stronger than their personal feelings about the person. This is important. Reciprocation can cause us to agree to requests from people we don't particularly like or trust. The sense of obligation transcends our personal feelings. This makes reciprocation a particularly powerful tool for influence, professionals who might not be able to rely on people liking them. So how do you defend against unwanted reciprocation? Cialdini's advice is simple but not always easy to implement. Refuse the initial gift or favour if you recognise it as a manipulation tactic. If someone gives you something you didn't ask for, with the clear intent of making you feel obligated, don't accept it. Or if you've already accepted it, mentally redefine it as a sales tactic rather than a genuine gift. You don't owe reciprocation for a sales device. This requires awareness and sometimes courage. It feels rude to refuse a gift or to not reciprocate. But Cialdini argues that genuine gifts should be reciprocal, while manipulation attempts disguised as gifts should not. The key is recognizing the difference. The reciprocation rule, like all the principles in this book, isn't inherently bad. It's what makes society work. It enables cooperation, builds trust, creates relationships. When used genuinely, when people give with true generosity and receive with true gratitude. It's a beautiful aspect of human nature. The problem arises when it's exploited, when gifts or favours are strategic tools deployed to create obligation rather than genuine expressions of goodwill. Understanding reciprocation helps you navigate this distinction. You can still be generous and grateful while protecting yourself from manipulation. You can give freely without expecting return, and receive gratefully without feeling unduly obligated. The goal is conscious choice rather than automatic compliance. The second principle of influence Cialdini identifies is our desire to be consistent with what we've already said or done. Once we make a choice or take a stand, we encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. We want to appear consistent to others and to ourselves. This drive to be consistent is a powerful motivator of human behaviour. Why do we value consistency so much? Cialdini explains that consistency is generally adaptive. It allows us to stop thinking about an issue once we've made a decision about it. It helps others predict our behaviour, making social interactions smoother. It's efficient. We don't have to reconsider every decision constantly. And in many contexts, consistency is seen as a positive trait. Inconsistent people are viewed as confused, two-faced, or unstable. But this drive for consistency can be exploited. Once someone gets you to make a small commitment, you'll be more likely to make larger commitments in the same direction. This is because backing out would be inconsistent with your earlier position, and inconsistency makes us uncomfortable. The classic demonstration of this is the foot in the door technique. Get someone to agree to a small request first, then follow up with a larger related request. The initial small agreement changes how people see themselves, making them more likely to agree to bigger requests later, to remain consistent with their self-image. Researchers tested this in California neighborhoods. They went door to door asking homeowners to put a large, ugly sign saying "Drive carefully" in their front yards. Only 17% agreed. But in another neighborhood, researchers first asked homeowners to display a small 3-inch sign with the same message. Nearly everyone agreed to this trivial request. 2 weeks later, when asked to put up the large ugly sign, 76% of these homeowners agreed, more than 4 times the rate of those who hadn't made the initial small commitment. What happened? The small initial commitment changed how these homeowners saw themselves. They became, in their own minds, the kind of people who support safe driving campaigns. When asked to make a larger commitment in that direction, they agreed to stay consistent with this self-image. This technique is used everywhere. Charities don't immediately ask for large donations, they start with small commitments, signing a petition, wearing a ribbon, displaying a sticker. These small acts change your self-perception. You become someone who supports this cause. Later, when asked for money, you're more likely to give to remain consistent with this identity. Salespeople use variations of this technique constantly. They get you to make small commitments that seem innocuous, agreeing that you like a product feature, acknowledging that you have a need, saying you'd be interested if the price were right. Each small agreement builds toward the final commitment to buy. By the time they ask for the sale, you've already committed to a series of positions that make buying the consistent choice. Car dealers have a particularly devious version called lowballing. They offer you an excellent price on a car, you agree to buy at that price. You fill out paperwork, make decisions about financing, do you discuss when you'll pick up the car? You've made a commitment. Then suddenly there's a problem. The manager won't approve that price, or they discovered they calculated the trade-in value wrong. The price goes up, but many people go through with the purchase anyway, even at the higher price, because they've already committed to buying that car. What's happening here? The initial commitment, even though it was based on false information, changed how you see the decision. You've mentally taken ownership of the car. You've made plans around having it. Backing out now feels like breaking a commitment, and that's uncomfortable. So you adjust your thinking to justify the new price rather than walking away. Cialdini points out that written commitments are particularly powerful. Something about writing down a statement or putting your name on a document makes it more real, more binding. This is why contracts are written, why salespeople get you to fill out forms, why testimonials are more powerful when they're written rather than just spoken. Public commitments are even stronger. When we take a stand publicly, when others know about our commitment, the pressure to be consistent intensifies. We don't just want to be consistent for ourselves, we want to appear consistent to others. Backing out of a public commitment means admitting we were wrong in front of others, which most people find very uncomfortable. Chinese communist interrogators during the Korean War exploited this brilliantly. They didn't torture American POWs to get collaboration. Instead, they got prisoners to make small pro-communist statements, sometimes just agreeing that America wasn't perfect or that there were some good things about communism. These statements were often written and sometimes made public to other prisoners. Over time, through a series of small public commitments, some prisoners came to see themselves differently and collaborated more extensively. The key insight here is that commitments change self-perception. Once you take a stand, even a small one, you start to see yourself as the kind of person who holds that position. And once your self-image changes, Your behaviour follows to remain consistent with that new identity. Cialdini emphasises that the commitment doesn't have to be large to be effective. In fact, getting someone to make a large commitment immediately is often counterproductive. Start small, get them to say yes to something trivial, then build from there. Each small yes makes the next yes easier because of the consistency principle. This also explains why hazing and difficult initiations work. Fraternities, clubs, and organisations that require difficult or painful initiation rituals end up with more committed members. Why? Because people who go through difficult initiations need to justify to themselves why they did it. They convince themselves the group must be really valuable, otherwise why would they have suffered to join? This justification makes them more committed members. The same principle applies to effort. When we work hard for something, we value it more highly. Not because the effort made it objectively better, but because we need to justify to ourselves why we put in the effort. We tell ourselves it must be worth it, and we become more committed to maintaining that belief. So how do you defend against unwanted commitment and consistency? Cialdini suggests 2 strategies. First, listen to your gut. If you feel pressured, if something doesn't feel right, if you're only agreeing because you made an earlier commitment that now seems questionable, pause, ask yourself, knowing what I know now, if I could go back, would I make the same commitment? If the answer is no, you shouldn't let consistency pressure you into continuing. Second, recognize commitment tactics when they're being used on you. When someone asks for a small favour or agreement, ask yourself if this might be a setup for a larger request. When you're being asked to write something down or make a public statement, consider what commitments that might create. The goal isn't to avoid all commitments. Commitments are valuable. They help us achieve goals, build relationships, maintain integrity. The goal is to make commitments consciously and to not be trapped by commitments that were extracted through manipulation or that we've outgrown. Understanding the commitment and consistency principle helps you make better decisions. You can still value consistency while remaining flexible enough to change course when genuinely better information becomes available. You can make commitments while protecting yourself from being locked into decisions by manipulation tactics. The third principle of influence is social proof. We determine what is correct by finding out what other people think is correct. When we're uncertain about what to do, we look to others for guidance. If many people are doing something, we assume it must be the right thing to do. This shortcut usually works well, but it can also lead us astray. Social proof is why laugh tracks work on television shows. Even though we know they're artificial, hearing others laugh makes us more likely to find something funny. This is why bartenders seed their tip jars with money. Seeing that others have tipped makes us more likely to tip. It's why advertisers tell us that millions of satisfied customers use their product. If that many people chose it, it must be good, right? The principle works because in most situations, what most people are doing is the right thing to do. If you're unsure which fork to use at a formal dinner, watch what others do. If you're in an unfamiliar city and don't know which restaurants are good, look for the crowded ones. If you're not sure how to behave in a particular social situation, observe what others are doing. This works most of the time. Cialdini illustrates the power of social proof with several studies. In one classic experiment, researchers left wallets scattered around a city. Each wallet contained money, identification, and a letter suggesting it had been lost and found once before by someone who was mailing it back to the owner. Some letters indicated that the previous finder was a foreign visitor, others indicated they were a fellow citizen. More wallets were returned when the previous finder was described as a fellow citizen. People followed the example set by someone like themselves. Social proof is particularly powerful in situations of uncertainty. When we're not sure what to do, we rely more heavily on what others are doing. This is why emergency situations can be so dangerous. In the famous Kitty Genovese case, a woman was attacked in New York while dozens of neighbours heard her screams. No one helped or called police for a long time. Why? Partly because of social proof, everyone was looking at everyone else to see if they should act. And since no one else was acting, each person concluded it must not be an emergency. This phenomenon, called bystander effect or diffusion of responsibility, has been demonstrated experimentally. When a person appears to need help, a lone witness will help most of the time. But when multiple witnesses are present, each individual is less likely to help. Everyone is looking to others for cues about how to interpret the situation, and everyone's inaction signals to everyone else that maybe no action is needed. Cialdini experienced this himself. He was in a situation where someone needed help. but because others weren't acting, he initially didn't act either. Only when he consciously recognized the social proof principle operating did he override it and provide help. His advice for emergencies: don't rely on the crowd. If you need help, single out a specific individual and make a direct request. Don't just shout, "Someone help me," point to someone and say, "You in the blue jacket, please call 911. Social proof doesn't just influence emergency behaviour, it shapes our everyday choices constantly. We choose popular restaurants over empty ones. We buy best-selling books. We watch highly rated shows when we trust products with many positive reviews. In each case, we're using other people's choices as a guide to quality. Advertisers exploit this relentlessly. Fastest growing, largest selling, preferred by more users, these claims leverage social proof. They tell you what other people are choosing, betting that you'll conclude that if many people made this choice, it must be good. And often we do conclude that. Social proof is particularly powerful when the other people are similar to us. We look to similar others for guidance more than to dissimilar others. That's why testimonials in advertising often feature people just like you. Similar age, similar background, similar situation. The message is, people like you chose this product, so you should too. Cialdini describes how this can be used ethically in positive ways. For example, hotels often try to encourage guests to reuse towels to save water and energy. Signs saying, "Please reuse your towels to save the environment," have some effect, but signs saying 75% of our guests reuse their towels are more effective. The social proof, knowing that most other guests reuse towels, motivates behaviour better than environmental appeals. The same principle explains fads and trends. When many people start doing something, wearing certain clothes, using certain slang, adopting certain behaviours, others follow. The behaviour spreads not necessarily because it's objectively better, but because social proof makes it seem correct. This is how fashions emerge and why they often seem baffling in retrospect. Social proof can also have dark applications. Cults use it to recruit and retain members. When a potential recruit sees dozens of happy, committed members, the social proof is powerful. All these people can't be wrong, can they? Within the cult, members' behaviour is constantly reinforced by seeing others behave the same way. Leaving becomes difficult because you'd be going against what everyone around you is doing. Suicide contagion is an even darker example. When a suicide is widely publicised, suicide rates temporarily increase. This is especially true when the publicised suicide is of someone similar to others. A teen suicide leads to more teen suicides, for instance. The social proof principle operates tragically here. If someone like me did this, maybe it's an acceptable response to problems. The principle also explains why pluralistic ignorance can persist. This is when everyone in a group privately rejects something but believes others accept it, so no one speaks up. For example, in a classroom, no student might understand the lecture, but each assumes the others understand because no one is asking questions, so no one asks for the clarification. Everyone's silence provides social proof to everyone else that everything is clear, even though everyone is confused. So how do you protect yourself from faulty social proof? Cialdini suggests being alert to two conditions. First, when you're in unfamiliar situations or experiencing uncertainty, recognise that you're more susceptible to social proof. This awareness alone can help you pause and think more carefully rather than automatically following the crowd. Second, be sceptical when the social proof might be faked or manipulated. Advertisers can claim millions use their product. Websites can buy fake reviews. Canned laughter isn't real laughter. Social media followers and likes can be purchased. Not all social proof is genuine proof that the crowd has made a good choice. The key is to use social proof as one input among many, not as the sole basis for decisions. What are many people doing? That's useful information. But why are they doing it? Is their situation really like yours? Do they have information you don't have, or are they just following social proof themselves? Are the numbers even real? Used wisely, social proof is valuable. Following the crowd often works, but blind conformity can lead you astray, especially when the crowd is wrong, when the situation is unusual, or when the social proof is manufactured. The goal is to benefit from social proof's wisdom while protecting yourself from its potential to mislead. The fourth principle of influence is simple. We prefer to say yes to people we like. This seems obvious, but the implications are profound. People who are able to make us like them, whether naturally or through calculated techniques, have a significant advantage in getting us to comply with their requests. Cialdini identifies several factors that make us like someone. Understanding these factors reveals how influence professionals make us like them, often without us realizing what's happening. These factors aren't manipulative in themselves, they reflect genuine aspects of human social psychology, but they can be deployed strategically to win favor. The first factor is physical attractiveness. Research consistently shows that we automatically assign favorable traits to good-looking people. We assume they're more talented, kind, honest, and intelligent than they really are. This halo effect means attractive people have an easier time persuading us, getting hired, receiving help, and avoiding punishment for wrongdoing. Studies show that attractive defendants receive lighter sentences. Attractive job applicants are hired more often. Attractive people asking for directions or small favors get more help. We don't think we're influenced by attractiveness. We believe we're evaluating people objectively. But the research is clear. Beauty provides a significant advantage in social influence. The second factor is similarity. We like people who are similar to us. This includes obvious similarities like age, background, or interests, but also subtle similarities in dress, speech patterns, or even names. Salespeople are trained to find common ground. "Oh, you're from Ohio. I have family there." These connections, even superficial ones, increase liking and thus increase compliance. Research shows that we're more likely to help people who dress like us, share our birth date, or have similar names. Car salespeople who are told a customer's age, hometown, and interests can increase their success by claiming similar backgrounds. The similarity doesn't have to be real, just claiming it works. Third, we like people who compliment us. Praise and flattery work, even when they're obviously designed to influence us. We know the car salesperson saying, "You have excellent taste," is probably saying that to everyone, but it still makes us like them more. Even insincere flattery can be effective because we want to believe the positive things people say about us. Cialdini describes research where people received either accurate personality assessments or random positive comments. They liked the people who gave them random praise more than those who gave them accurate assessments. We like people who flatter us, even when the flattery is undeserved or obviously manipulative. Fourth, we like people who cooperate with us towards shared goals. This is why Tupperware parties work. You're not just being sold to by a salesperson. You're attending a party hosted by a friend. The social nature of the event, the cooperation between host and guests, the shared experience all create liking, and that liking translates into sales. This principle also explains why good cop/bad cop routines work. After dealing with a hostile interrogator, bad cop, the suspect feels grateful toward and likes the friendly interrogator, good cop. This liking makes them more willing to cooperate. The bad cop makes the good cop seem even better by comparison. Fifth, we like people and things that we associate with positive experiences. This is basic classical conditioning, and advertisers exploit it constantly. Attractive models, pleasant music, beautiful scenery, these positive elements get associated with products, making us like the products more. We see celebrities we like endorsing products, and our positive feelings toward the celebrity transfer to the product. This works even when the association is random or meaningless. In experiments, people rated photographs of strangers more favorably when shown while eating pleasant food compared to unpleasant food. The positive experience of eating good food became associated with the faces, making people like those more. The sixth factor is repeated contact and familiarity. Generally, the more we're exposed to something or someone, the more we like it, assuming the initial encounters aren't negative. This is why you might dislike a song the first time you hear it, but grow to like it after hearing it repeatedly. Familiarity breeds liking. Salespeople use this by creating repeated contact. They don't just pitch once and leave, they follow up, they check in, they stay in touch. Each contact, even if brief, increases familiarity and potentially liking. This is why relationship building is emphasized in sales. People buy from people they know and like. Perhaps the most systematic use of the liking principle is in network marketing or multi-level marketing. These business models explicitly recruit people to sell to their friends and family. Why? Because you like your friends and family, and you're more likely to buy from people you like. The company essentially pays salespeople to exploit their existing relationships. Tupperware, Mary Kay, Amway, and similar companies to use this model. A friend hosts a party or approaches you directly about products. You're not dealing with a stranger or corporate salesperson. You're dealing with someone you know and like. This relationship makes it much harder to say no. You don't want to disappoint your friend or seem unsupportive. Cialdini notes that these companies often use the language of friendship to describe what are actually sales relationships. Distributors call customers friends, frame sales interactions as helping friends, and emphasize the relationship over the transaction. This framing exploits the liking principle even more effectively. The good cop/bad cop technique mentioned earlier demonstrates how liking can be manufactured and manipulated. In police interrogations, one officer is hostile, aggressive, and accusatory. Then a second officer intervenes, treats the suspect with respect and sympathy, maybe even criticizes the first officer's harsh treatment. The suspect feels grateful and likes this second officer, making them more willing to confess or cooperate. This isn't just used by police. Salespeople use variations where they fight with their manager to get you a better deal. Car salespeople go to talk to their manager about your offer, then come back having convinced the manager to accept it. You feel like the salesperson is on your side fighting for you, and you like them for it. This liking makes you more likely to complete the purchase. So how do you defend against the liking principle being used to manipulate you? Cialdini's advice is to separate your feelings about the person from your decision about their request. When you notice yourself liking a salesperson or requester unusually quickly or strongly, given how little you actually know them, that's a warning sign. Ask yourself, do I like this person more than I would expect given our actual relationship? If you find yourself thinking, they're so nice, or they really understand me about someone you just met who's trying to sell you something, pause. Your feelings might be genuine, but they might also be the result of calculated liking techniques. Cialdini's suggestion is to mentally separate the person from the proposition. Say to yourself, I like this person, but that's separate from whether what they're offering is good for me. Evaluate the offer on its merits, not based on your feelings about the person making it. One of the most deeply ingrained shortcuts in human decision-making is obedience to authority. From childhood, we are taught that authority figures, parents, teachers, doctors, police officers, religious leaders, know better than we do. Obeying them is framed as sensible, responsible, even moral. As a result, when someone appears to hold legitimate authority, we are far more likely to comply with their requests, often without critically evaluating them. Cialdini argues that authority works not because authority figures are always right, but because following authority has historically been adaptive. In complex societies, we cannot personally verify everything. We rely on experts to guide us. If a doctor prescribes medication, we usually take it. If a pilot announces turbulence, we buckle our seatbelt. This delegation of judgment allows society to function efficiently. But just as with every other principle of influence, authority can be exploited. One of the most famous demonstrations of blind obedience comes from Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments in the 1960s. Participants were instructed by a man in a lab coat to administer increasingly severe electric shocks to another person whenever that person answered questions incorrectly. Despite hearing screams of pain and despite their own moral discomfort, the majority of participants continued administering shocks simply because an authority figure told them to do so. The shocking conclusion was not that people are cruel, but that ordinary decent individuals will commit harmful acts when instructed by perceived authority. The lab coat, the institutional setting, the confident tone all signalled legitimacy. Participants deferred responsibility upward. I was just following orders. Authority doesn't require actual power. It only requires the appearance of legitimacy. Cialdini explains that influence professionals use symbols of authority to trigger compliance. These symbols include titles, uniforms, credentials, and even props. A person wearing a white coat is assumed to be knowledgeable. A person in a suit is assumed to be competent. A person behind a desk is assumed to be in charge. In one study, pedestrians were more likely to follow jaywalking instructions when the person giving directions wore a business suit than when the same person wore casual clothes. Nothing else changed, only the symbol of authority. Advertisers understand this deeply. That's why toothpaste commercials feature actors dressed as dentists. Why financial products are endorsed by experts. Why medical ads include people in lab coats, stethoscopes around their necks, even when they're actors. The authority cue bypasses critical thinking. What's particularly dangerous is how authority suppresses doubt. When someone we perceive as an expert speaks confidently, we assume they've already done the thinking for us. Questioning them feels necessary, or even disrespectful. This is why authority works even when the authority figure has no actual expertise in the relevant area. Celebrities endorse products they know nothing about, yet their perceived status transfers authority. The audience assumes, if they are successful, they must know something. Cialdini points out that titles alone can dramatically alter behaviour. In hospitals, nurses were more likely to administer dangerous doses of medication over the phone when instructed by someone introduced as doctor, even when the order violated hospital policy. The title overrode training, ethics, and common sense. Another subtle authority tactic is confidence. People who speak quickly, decisively, and without hesitation are perceived as more knowledgeable, even when they're wrong. Confidence signals competence, and competence signals authority. Salespeople are trained to avoid uncertainty. Saying, "I'm not sure," weakens authority. Saying, "This is the best option for you," strengthens it. The listener relaxes, relieved to hand over decision-making responsibility. Authority also works because it creates moral displacement. When someone higher up gives instructions, people shift responsibility away from themselves. If something goes wrong, it's not my fault. I was told to do it. This psychological escape hatch makes compliance easier. So how do you defend yourself? Cialdini emphasizes critical evaluation over automatic respect. Authority deserves consideration, but not blind obedience. The key question is not, is this person an authority? But is this person an authority on this specific issue? He also advises separating authority from accuracy. Experts can be wrong, credentials don't guarantee honesty, uniforms don't guarantee good intentions. Another defense is recognizing manufactured authority. Ask yourself, is this person genuinely qualified, or are they relying on surface symbols? Are they explaining their reasoning or simply issuing commands? Finally, remember this. Legitimate authority welcomes questions. Manipulative authority discourages them. Authority, when real and ethical, helps us navigate complexity, but when abused, it becomes one of the most dangerous tools of influence. Understanding it doesn't make you rebellious, it makes you responsible. The final principle of influence is scarcity. People assign more value to opportunities when they are less available. We want things more when we believe we might lose them. The possibility of loss is more motivating than the promise of gain. Scarcity works because our brains are wired to treat limited resources as valuable. In evolutionary terms, scarcity often meant survival. Food, territory, mates, what was rare was worth fighting for. In modern life, this instinct hasn't disappeared. It's simply been repurposed. Marketers understand this perfectly. A limited time offer, only 3 left in stock, exclusive access, last chance. These phrases trigger urgency. They shift our mindset from rational evaluation to emotional reaction. When something is scarce, we stop asking, "Do I need this?" and start asking, "What if I miss out?" Cialdini explains that scarcity increases desire in 2 main ways. First, scarce items seem more valuable. Second, scarcity threatens our freedom of choice, and humans hate losing freedom. When something is about to be taken away, we react emotionally. This phenomenon is known as psychological reactance. When people feel their options are being restricted, they desire those options more intensely. A book banned by authorities becomes more appealing. A restricted website becomes more tempting. A relationship declared off-limits becomes more desirable. Scarcity doesn't even have to be real. Perceived scarcity is enough. In one experiment, shoppers evaluated cookies from 2 jars. One jar contained many cookies, the other contained only 2. Participants rated the cookies from the nearly empty jar as more desirable, even though the cookies were identical. The lack created value. Scarcity becomes even more powerful when combined with competition. Auctions, flash sales, and bidding wars exploit this. The presence of other interested buyers signals value, and the fear of losing to someone else amplifies desire. Cialdini notes that people often make their worst decisions under scarcity pressure. When time is limited, we rely more heavily on emotional shortcuts. We stop comparing alternatives. We stop questioning assumptions. We just act. Romantic relationships can also trigger scarcity. Being told "I'm not ready to commit" or "I might leave" often increases attachment. The threat of loss intensifies feelings, even if the relationship wasn't particularly fulfilling before. Scarcity is also used politically. Leaders create artificial shortages of safety, resources, or certainty to increase compliance. When people feel endangered or deprived, they are more willing to surrender freedoms in exchange for security. So how do you resist scarcity manipulation? Cialdini's advice is simple but powerful. Pause. Scarcity thrives on speed. It pushes you to act now. The moment you feel urgency, slow down. Ask, is this opportunity truly rare, or is it being framed that way? Also ask, would I want this if it were widely available? Another defense is reframing loss. Instead of focusing on what you might lose by not acting, focus on what you might lose by acting hastily: money, freedom. Bears in mind. Finally, remember this: genuine value doesn't disappear instantly. Real opportunities withstand scrutiny. Manipulative ones demand immediate obedience. Scarcity, like all influence principles, is not inherently bad. Some things truly are limited. Time really does run out. But awareness gives you choice. When you understand scarcity, you stop being driven by fear and start acting from clarity. In later editions of Influence, Cialdini introduced a seventh principle: unity. While the earlier principles explain how people say yes, unity explains why some requests feel impossible to refuse. Unity is the influence that comes not from liking someone, but from sharing an identity with them. When someone is perceived as part of us, their requests feel fundamentally different from those made by outsiders. Unity operates at a deeper psychological level than similarity. Similarity says, you're like me. Unity says, you are me. It blurs the line between self and other. When unity is activated, helping the group feels like helping oneself. Human beings evolved in tribes. Survival depended on group cohesion. Loyalty to the group meant safety. Exclusion meant danger. As a result, our brains are extremely sensitive to signals of shared identity. Family, nationality, religion, ethnicity, profession, sports teams, these aren't just labels. They define who belongs and who doesn't. When unity is present, persuasion becomes effortless. Cialdini illustrates this with examples from warfare. Soldiers don't fight merely because they are ordered to. They fight because they see themselves as part of a unit. The language used is always collective: brothers, family, band of brothers. Sacrifice makes sense when it's framed as protecting us. The same mechanism operates in everyday life. People are far more willing to help someone they perceive as part of their group. Studies show that individuals donate more to charities representing their own community, vote more consistently with their perceived group identity, and forgive misbehavior more readily when it comes from insiders. Unity is why family requests carry extraordinary weight. A favor from a stranger can be refused. A favor from family feels morally binding, even when it's unreasonable. The shared identity overrides rational calculation. Marketers exploit unity by constructing artificial group identities. Brands don't just sell products, they sell belonging. Apple users, gamers, patriots, entrepreneurs. When people adopt these identities, brand loyalty becomes personal. Criticism of the brand feels like criticism of the self. Social media amplifies unity by constantly reinforcing group identity. Algorithms show you content aligned with your beliefs, values, and affiliations. Over time, the group becomes psychologically real. Outsiders feel threatening. Insiders feel trustworthy by default. This has profound consequences. Unity increases generosity, but also tribalism. It encourages cooperation, but also blind loyalty. It makes people resilient, but also resistant to evidence that contradicts group beliefs. Cialdini notes that unity can override other influence principles entirely. Scarcity matters less when the group is secure. Authority matters less when leaders are seen as outsiders. Even liking becomes secondary. People tolerate unpleasant insiders more than pleasant outsiders. One of the most effective unitist triggers is shared struggle. Groups that endure hardship together bond more strongly. Initiation rituals, difficult training, shared adversity. These create unity by forging a collective story. We suffered together, therefore we belong together. This explains why extremist groups often recruit people who feel isolated. They offer not just ideology but identity. The message is simple: you're one of us now. Once unity is established, persuasion becomes loyalty enforcement. So how do you defend against unity-based influence? Cialdini doesn't suggest rejecting group identity. Humans need belonging. Instead, he urges awareness. Ask yourself, am I agreeing because that benefits me, or because I fear betraying my group? Another defense is multiple identities. People who define themselves narrowly by one group alone are more easily manipulated. People with layered identities, family, profession, hobbies, values, are more resilient. No single group controls their choices. Finally, remember this. Unity explains loyalty, not truth. Shared identity does not guarantee correctness, morality, or fairness. Unity is powerful because it feels right. It feels natural. But understanding it allows you to choose cooperation consciously, rather than surrendering autonomy unconsciously. After revealing how influence works, Cialdini turns to the most important question. How do you defend yourself? Not by rejecting persuasion altogether, but by resisting manipulation while remaining open to legitimate influence. The goal is not to become suspicious, cynical, or hostile. The goal is conscious choice. Cialdini emphasizes that influence principles work best when we operate on autopilot. They exploit speed, habit, and emotional shortcuts. Defense begins by slowing down. The first line of defense is recognition. Once you can identify which principle is being used, its power weakens. A free gift triggers reciprocation. A small request sets up commitment. Everyone's doing it signals social proof. Compliments activate liking, credentials invoke authority. Limited time offers create scarcity. We're family triggers unity. Naming the tactic creates psychological distance. It moves you from participant to observer. The second defense is reframing. Instead of responding to the surface request, reframe the situation internally. A salesperson offering a favor is not being generous. They are initiating an exchange. A sudden price increase after commitment is not bad luck. It's lowballing. A flattering stranger is not uniquely insightful. They are deploying a liking strategy. This doesn't mean the request is bad. It means it deserves evaluation independent of the tactic. The third defense is asking the right question. Cialdini suggests replacing "do I want to say yes" with "would I say yes if this influence factor were removed? Would I still agree if there were no gift? I hadn't already said yes earlier. If other people weren't watching and the requester wasn't so likable. The authority symbols disappeared. The offer weren't scarce. This person weren't part of my group. If the answer changes, influence, not value, is driving the decision. Another powerful defense is time. Manipulation thrives on urgency. Legitimate offers survive delay. Saying "I need time to think" is one of the most effective resistance tools, and one of the hardest to use socially. Cialdini notes that people fear saying no because no feels rude. But refusing manipulation is not unethical, it's necessary. Ethical persuaders respect boundaries, manipulators resent them. He also introduces the idea of selective vulnerability. It's okay to be influenced by people you trust, in contexts where interests align. Influence becomes manipulation when transparency disappears and pressure replaces choice. Importantly, Cialdini does not suggest refusing influence across the board. Influence is part of human connection. Advice, recommendations, teaching, leadership all rely on influence. The difference lies in intent and alignment. Ethical influence increases understanding, preserves freedom, aligns interests, welcomes scrutiny. Manipulative influence exploits shortcuts, suppresses doubt, creates pressure, avoids transparency. One of the most liberating realizations is this: you are allowed to change your mind. Consistency is only virtuous when it serves truth and growth. Stubborn consistency serves manipulators. Cialdini encourages developing a personal rule. I reserve the right to revise my decisions when new information appears. This protects against commitment traps and guilt-based pressure. Ultimately, the strongest defense is self-respect. People who trust their judgment, values, and boundaries are harder to manipulate. Not because they're immune, but because they pause. Influence works because it's human. Defense works because awareness restores choice. Understanding persuasion doesn't make life colder. It makes it clearer. You still say yes, but now you know why. When Influence was first published, persuasion largely happened face-to-face. Salespeople, fundraisers, authority figures, these were human interactions, rich with tone, presence, and social cues. But the principles Cialdini identified were never limited to physical proximity. In the digital age, they have not weakened. They have multiplied. Today, influence operates invisibly, silently, constantly. The digital environment is uniquely suited to persuasion because it removes friction. Decisions are faster, context is thinner, and emotional cues are amplified. Screens strip away hesitation while preserving influence triggers. A click replaces a conversation. A scroll replaces reflection. Social proof is everywhere. Likes, shares, views, ratings, comments. Quantified approval has become a substitute for judgment. When we see that a video has millions of views, we assume it must be worth watching. When a product has thousands of positive reviews, we trust it more than expert evaluation. Numbers feel objective, even when they're curated or manipulated. Platforms understand this deeply. Algorithms prioritize content that already has engagement, creating a feedback loop. Popularity breeds more popularity. The appearance of consensus becomes reality. Scarcity has been engineered into digital life. Limited time discounts refresh daily. Countdown timers tick towards zero. Only 2 seats left flashes on booking sites, even when availability is artificial. Digital scarcity doesn't require actual limitation, only perceived urgency. Commitment and consistency are reinforced through public identity online. Once you post an opinion, it becomes part of your digital self. Changing your mind feels like erasing yourself. The pressure to remain consistent increases because your words are archived, searchable, and visible to others. This is why online arguments rarely end in changed minds. Admitting error feels like public loss of identity. Instead, people double down, not because they're convinced, but because consistency demands it. Liking has become algorithmic. Platforms track what you engage with, then feed you more of it. Faces, voices, ideas you already like. Familiarity breeds trust. Over time, content creators begin to feel like friends. Parasocial relationships form. Viewers feel loyalty to people they've never met. Authority, too, has shifted. Credentials matter less than confidence and visibility. People with large followings are perceived as experts, even when they lack training or accuracy. The signal of authority is no longer knowledge, but attention. Unity is perhaps the most amplified principle online. Communities form around beliefs, aesthetics, grievances, and identities. Hashtags become tribes, memes become ideology. Language evolves to signal belonging. Once unity is established, dissent feels like betrayal. Digital platforms don't invent influence, they optimize it. What makes this environment particularly dangerous is speed. Influence principles work best when decisions are fast and emotional. Online, everything is fast. There is no natural pause. Content scrolls endlessly. Each moment invites reaction, not reflection. Cialdini warns that the absence of friction is not neutral. It favors manipulation. When choices are easy, people rely more heavily on shortcuts. So what does defense look like in the digital age? First, slow down. The most effective resistance is time. Delay purchases, pause before sharing, step away before responding. Even a few minutes can restore critical thinking. Second, curate consciously. Algorithms shape perception. If you don't choose your inputs, someone else will. Follow diverse viewpoints, break echo chambers. Discomfort is not danger. Third, question numbers. Popularity is not truth. Engagement is not accuracy. Virality often reflects emotional charge, not value. Fourth, separate identity from opinion. You're allowed to update your beliefs. Growth is not inconsistency, it's intelligence. The digital age has not changed human psychology, it has simply placed it under constant pressure. Influence has become ambient, persistent, and optimized. Understanding persuasion is no longer optional, it's a survival skill. After exposing the mechanics of influence, Cialdini confronts a difficult question. If persuasion works this well, should it be used at all? And if so, where is the ethical line? Influence itself is not immoral. Human cooperation depends on persuasion. Parents guide children. Teachers inspire students. Leaders motivate groups. Doctors encourage healthy behavior. None of this is possible without influence. The ethical difference lies not in the method, but in the intent and transparency. Ethical influence respects autonomy. It provides information, context, and choice. It helps people make decisions aligned with their own interests. Manipulative influence obscures information, applies pressure, and benefits the influencer at the expense of the influenced. Cialdini emphasizes that ethical persuaders are not afraid of scrutiny. They welcome questions, they allow time, they don't rely on urgency or deception. Their influence survives daylight. Manipulators, by contrast, avoid reflection. They rush decisions, they hide alternatives, they frame refusal as loss or betrayal. They rely on emotional leverage rather than reasoned agreement. One way to distinguish ethical influence is to ask, would the person still say yes if they fully understood what was happening? If the answer is no, persuasion has crossed into exploitation. Cialdini introduces the idea of aligned interests. Ethical influence occurs when both parties benefit. A teacher wants students to learn, a patient wants to heal, a customer wants a solution. Influence that aligns these goals is constructive. Manipulative influence creates asymmetry. One party gains while the other loses clarity, freedom, or well-being. Importantly, ethical influence does not eliminate persuasion techniques. It uses them responsibly. Social proof can encourage environmentally responsible behavior. Scarcity can communicate genuine limitations. Authority can guide people toward expertise. Unity can strengthen cooperation. The problem arises when these tools are stripped of context and used purely to override judgment. Cialdini argues that those who understand influence have a responsibility. Knowledge creates power. Power creates obligation. Using persuasion ethically means resisting the temptation to exploit vulnerability. He also challenges the listener to examine their own behavior. Influence is not something done only to us, it's something we do to others. Every request, suggestion, recommendation, and argument contains influence. Do we use it to help or to control? One of the most profound insights in influence is that awareness restores dignity. When people understand how persuasion works, they are no longer passive targets. They become participants. This doesn't make influence disappear. It makes it mutual. Ethical persuasion treats people as capable decision-makers, not obstacles to be overcome. In the end, Cialdini's message is not defensive. It's empowering. Understanding influence doesn't make life suspicious. It makes it intentional. You still say yes, you still say no, but now the choice is truly yours. One of the most unsettling realizations in influence is not that people can be persuaded, but that much of human behavior operates without conscious awareness. Cialdini returns repeatedly to this idea. The human brain is not designed for constant analysis. It is designed for efficiency. To survive complexity, it relies on automatic responses. These responses are not flaws. They are features. Automaticity allows us to function. We drive without consciously analyzing every movement. We speak without planning every sentence. We navigate social situations using learned scripts. Without these shortcuts, everyday life would grind to a halt. But automaticity has a cost. Influence principles work because they trigger preloaded responses. When a familiar cue appears, the brain supplies a familiar reaction. Often before conscious thought intervenes, the mind answers before it asks the question. Cialdini explains that automatic behavior emerges when three conditions are present: familiarity, time pressure, cognitive overload. Modern life provides all three constantly, and we live surrounded by signals demanding attention. Notifications, advertisements, requests, opinions. The brain conserves energy by switching to shortcuts. Influence thrives in this environment. Take reciprocation. When someone gives, the response is immediate. Repay. Commitment triggers stay consistent. Social proof triggers follow. Liking triggers agree. Authority triggers obey. Scarcity triggers act now. Unity triggers protect us. None of these require deliberation. That's why they're powerful. Cialdini describes this as the difference between mindful responding and were responding. A mechanical sequence where the right trigger produces the predictable outcome. Influence professionals don't need to convince you. They only need to activate the correct lever. This explains why intelligent, educated people are not immune. Automaticity bypasses intelligence. It doesn't ask whether you're smart, it asks whether you are busy, tired, distracted, or emotionally engaged. In fact, expertise can increase vulnerability. Experts rely more heavily on heuristics in their own domain because they've learned what usually works. But when someone deliberately mimics those signals, even experts can be fooled. Cialdini emphasizes that automaticity increases with repetition. The more often a response works, the more deeply it becomes ingrained. Over time, behavior shifts from choice to reflex. This is why habits are powerful and why breaking them is difficult. Once the brain automates a response, conscious override requires effort. Effort is expensive. The brain avoids it unless forced. The danger is not automation itself, but unexamined automation. Cialdini recounts examples where people complied with absurd requests simply because the request fit a familiar pattern. In one study, people were more likely to allow someone to cut in line at a photocopier if the person provided a reason, even if the reason was meaningless. May I use the copier because I need to make copies? The presence of a reason triggered compliance, regardless of content. The brain heard the structure, not the logic. This reveals something critical. Form often matters more than substance. Influence works not by persuasion, but by pattern recognition. So how do you reclaim agency? Cialdini argues that you don't need to eliminate automaticity, you need to interrupt it selectively. Conscious thinking should be reserved for situations where the cost of error is high. He suggests creating personal tripwires, signals that tell you to slow down. These might include feeling rushed, feeling pressured to be polite, feeling obligated without understanding why, feeling fear of missing out, feeling identity-based loyalty override reason. When these sensations arise, they are not instructions, they are warnings. Automaticity cannot survive attention. The moment you notice it, it weakens. Cialdini also stresses the importance of self-compassion. Falling for influence does not mean you are foolish, it means you're human. The goal is not perfection, it's awareness. Automatic responses will always exist, but conscious interruption restores choice. Influence is strongest when invisible. Defense begins when it becomes seen. At its core, Influence is not a book about persuasion. It is a book about freedom. Not freedom as an abstract ideal, but freedom as a psychological condition, the ability to choose without illusion. Cialdini does not claim that people are controlled by influence. He argues something subtler and more disturbing. People are guided by forces they rarely notice. Their choices feel voluntary, but their path was quietly shaped. Freedom, then, is not the absence of influence. That would be impossible. Freedom is the ability to recognize influence and still choose. Throughout the book, Cialdini dismantles the comforting belief that awareness alone makes us immune. Instead, he shows that freedom requires effort. It requires vigilance. It requires humility. One of the greatest illusions of autonomy is believing that persuasion only works on others. This belief is itself a vulnerability. The moment you assume immunity, you stop paying attention. Cialdini emphasizes that influence operates probabilistically, not absolutely. It doesn't guarantee compliance, it increases likelihood. Even a small increase multiplied across millions of interactions becomes enormous power. This is why influence industries are so profitable. They don't need certainty, they need margins. Freedom requires understanding that choice is context-dependent. Decisions are shaped by framing, timing, emotion, and environment. Remove the illusion of pure rationality, and autonomy becomes something you actively maintain, not something you passively possess. Cialdini challenges the listener to reconsider responsibility. If behavior can be guided so easily, who is accountable? His answer is nuanced. Individuals are responsible for developing awareness. Influencers are responsible for ethical use. Systems are responsible for transparency. Freedom is a shared obligation. He also addresses a deeper concern. Does understanding influence make life cynical? His answer is no. Awareness does not remove meaning, it removes manipulation. Relationships become more honest. Agreements become more deliberate. Trust becomes earned, not assumed. Influence understood ethically becomes education rather than control. Cialdini returns to the concept of informed consent. When people know how they are being influenced, persuasion becomes collaboration. When they don't, it becomes exploitation. True freedom, then, is not resistance, it's participation with clarity. The ultimate lesson of influence is not to say no more often. It's to say yes for the right reasons. Yes to generosity, not obligation. Yes to consistency, not entrapment. Yes to community, not blind unity. Yes to authority, not surrender. Yes to urgency, not panic. When you understand persuasion, you reclaim authorship of your decisions, and in a world competing relentlessly for your attention, your money, and your beliefs, that may be the most valuable form of freedom there is. With understanding comes responsibility. This is the quiet but unavoidable conclusion of influence. Once you understand how persuasion works, once you see the mechanisms beneath everyday decisions, You can no longer claim ignorance. Knowledge changes the ethical landscape. Cialdini is careful here. He does not accuse, he does not moralize. Instead, he invites reflection. Influence, he reminds us, is not rare or exceptional, it is constant. Every request, suggestion, recommendation, argument, and appeal is an attempt, however small, to shape another person's behavior. Parents influence children, friends influence friends, teachers influence students, leaders influence followers. Even silence can influence. The question is not whether we influence, but how. Cialdini argues that understanding persuasion creates a moral asymmetry. Those who understand influence hold more power than those who do not. Power without reflection leads to abuse, even when unintentional. This is why ethical responsibility matters. One of the most dangerous rationalizations is, everyone does it. Manipulation feels justified when normalized. If scarcity tactics are unstandard, why not use them? If social proof boosts compliance, why not exaggerate it? If authority commands obedience, why not dress it up? Cialdini rejects this reasoning. Common does not mean ethical, effective does not mean justified. He proposes a simple ethical test. Would I still be comfortable using this influence if the person fully understood how it worked? If transparency would destroy effectiveness, the method likely depends on deception. Ethical influence does not require ignorance, it survives awareness. Cialdini emphasizes that persuasion is not inherently coercive. The same principles that manipulate can also educate, motivate, and protect. Social proof can promote public health. Authority can guide people toward expertise. Scarcity can signal genuine limits. Unity can foster cooperation and resilience. The difference lies in alignment of interest. When influence helps people achieve outcomes they would choose with full information, it respects autonomy. When it steers people toward outcomes they would reject if fully informed, it violates it. Cialdini also addresses the responsibility of institutions. Corporations, governments, platforms, and organizations wield influence at scale. When persuasion is amplified by technology, responsibility increases proportionally. Systems designed to exploit attention, emotion, and identity without regard for well-being are not neutral. They shape behavior, belief, and culture. Influence at scale becomes social architecture. Responsibility then is shared. Individuals must cultivate awareness. Influencers must commit to transparency. Institutions must design ethically. Ignoring any layer creates imbalance. Cialdini is especially critical of influence that targets vulnerability. Children, the elderly, the distressed, the isolated. Exploiting cognitive or emotional weakness is not persuasion, it is predation. He urges restraint not because influence is powerful, but because people are. Every person influenced is a human being with dignity, agency, and consequence-bearing decisions. Treating influence as a game erodes trust. Treating it as a responsibility preserves it. Importantly, Cialdini does not argue for perfection. Ethical influence is not about eliminating persuasion errors, it's about intentional restraint, about choosing not to exploit every advantage simply because you can. Power tests character not when it's resisted, but when it is unchallenged. Understanding influence reveals a simple truth. Persuasion shapes lives, and shaping lives carries weight. The final message of influence is not caution, it is confidence. Not fear, but clarity. Cialdini closes not by warning the listener to retreat from persuasion, but by encouraging them to stand fully present within it. Awareness is the ultimate defense, not awareness as suspicion, but awareness as literacy. Just as reading literacy protects against misinformation, persuasion literacy protects against manipulation. It does not eliminate influence, it restores choice. Cialdini returns to the idea that the human mind is efficient, not flawed. The shortcuts we rely on evolved to help us survive complexity. The problem arises only when those shortcuts are triggered without our consent. Awareness does not shut down automatic responses. It gives you the power to interrupt them when needed. This is why the most dangerous belief is not ignorance, but false immunity. Thinking I'm not influenced guarantees influence. Thinking I might be influenced creates space for choice. Cialdini emphasizes that the goal is not to become defensive or cynical. Cynicism closes people off from connection. Awareness keeps them open but alert. You can still enjoy persuasion. You can still be moved, you can still be inspired, you can still say yes, but now your yes is informed. Awareness allows you to distinguish persuasion from pressure, authority from dominance, unity from tribal blindness, urgency from panic, consistency from entrapment. It allows you to ask a better question: why this request, or why now? Who benefits? What happens if I wait? What would I choose without pressure? These questions do not destroy persuasion, they refine it. Cialdini ends with a quiet but powerful insight. Freedom is not the absence of influence, but the presence of understanding. In a world saturated with persuasion, where every screen, headline, and interaction competes for attention, understanding influence is not optional. It is foundational. You will be influenced. That is unavoidable. But you do not have to be controlled. When you understand the principles of influence, you reclaim authorship of your decisions. You move from reaction to reflection, from habit to intention. And that ultimately is what this book offers. Not protection from persuasion, but mastery of it. Not armor, but tact sight. The most powerful influence is the one you choose, fully aware, fully informed, and fully your own.